You know what I think is most dangerous right now? It's not even the war by itself. It's the story people are telling about it. Because everybody wants to hand you a children's book version of something that's violent, layered, and way bigger than any one slogan. Slogans like Iran is bad, Israel is justified, America is strong. Or people give you the reverse sermon, which is to say America's evil, therefore every event is secretly part of one giant plot. But reality doesn't fit neatly into either of these sales pitches. What we're watching is actually five systems crashing into each other all at once. You have a military war, a nuclear verification crisis, an oil choke point crisis, a regional spillover crisis, and at the center of it all, you have an American political crisis. And that is the war beneath the war. And the thing about reality is, if you show up late to it, it charges interest. So, no, this is not the late show. This is the never late show because it's never too late to get informed, it's never too late to catch up, and it's certainly never too late to start paying attention. But it does get expensive when you arrive late to the truth. Welcome to the first installment of the Never Late Show, where I plan to do something that's becoming increasingly rare in modern media, which is to slow things down, separate facts from performance, and explain what the hell is actually going on. Tonight, we're starting with Iran, Israel, US, oil, nuclear risks, lobbying, religion, how they all tie together. What is this war actually about? Because if you only understand the surface of it all, you don't understand the conflict, you just understand the trailer. So, let's start with the first layer I talked about. Yes, there is a war. It is a raging and developing war. And it's very obvious because the United States and Israel launched a major strike on Iran on February 28, 2026, and the conflict has obviously widened quickly. But if you stop there, you miss the architecture. This goes well beyond who attacked who. What matters is which pressure points light up or where to begin. So we need better questions. Not just who attacked, but what are the incentives behind each party? What are the leverage points? What are the bottlenecks? What are the feedback loops? And who benefits when the public stays intellectually exhausted in this information overload? That's a much better place for all of us to start. So let's get first into the nuclear issue, because this is where things get sloppy rather quickly. The nuclear question that faces all of us is not simply does Iran have a nuclear bomb, because that's too primitive and we know that they probably don't on good authority. But the better question is what can actually be verified right now? And that process, verification, gets jeopardized during war times. Iran is party to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And according to the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, the real problem here is not just enrichment, but it's verification of that enrichment. That includes inspections and inventory accounting and access and continuity of knowledge. Those things matter because war does not only affect facilities and destroy them, it destroys certainty. And when certainty is destroyed, fear fills the space. So, now, here's one of the most important numbers in this conversation. Reuters, citing an IAEA report, said that Iran currently has about 441 kilos of 60% enriched uranium. Now, let's pause there, because 60% is not the same thing as a finished nuclear warhead. It's not even the same thing as weapon-grade uranium. Weapons grade, rather. Weapons grade is generally discussed at around 90% enrichment. So if somebody tells you, see, they already have nukes, well, that's sloppy. On the same vein, if somebody tells you, we don't have anything to worry about, well, that's very sloppy too, because the honest version sounds something like Iran built a level of nuclear latency that threatened its enemies, and the war has made independent light of all of that. That is a more accurate depiction and a more responsible one. So let's move in to the second system, which is energy. That's at the crux as well. Because this is where foreign war stops feeling abstract or even foreign and starts crawling into our wallets. Because the Strait of Hormuz, it's not a side note. It's not some geography B trivia answer. It is a lever, a huge lever. According to the US Energy Information Administration, in 2024, 20 million barrels per day moved through the strait. That accounted for 20% of the global petroleum liquid consumption. So this isn't just a waterway, it's one of the economic nerve centers of the world. And then in March 26, now, the agency announced a 400 million barrel emergency stock release, the largest in its history, to address the concerns related to this conflict. And that's not routine. And that's the government telling you in policy language that the shock to the system is real, and so is the threat. That's the part a lot of people miss. Iran does not need some Hollywood victory. It doesn't need a flag planting moment. It needs to make this war expensive, and that's probably what it intends to do. It needs this war to be prolonged and messy and politically toxic. And that is what choke points do. They turn geography into strategy. And then comes the domestic translation of all of this into our homes. It's gasoline. I mean, it's always gasoline, because no matter how theoretical people want to get online, the American public encounters geopolitics when it affects household prices. AAA today on March 13, 26 listed the US average gasoline price as $3.63 per gallon. Now that's how foreign war becomes domestic. That's how strategy becomes dinner table talks. You don't need every voter to understand everything. You just need them to look at the pump at the grocery store. That is the household interface of war. So let's move on to the third system, which is regional spillover. Because this war is already wider than the lazy version of this story. A lot of Americans are still consuming this like it's just a duel. I mean, it's not a duel. It's a widening system. There's a lot of players at play. You know, Lebanon matters, and Turkey matters, and the Gulf matters, and the NATO math matters. Shipping lanes matter. Proxy networks matter. War widens through systems, not slogans. You get proxy activation and airspace risk and shipping and export disruption. You get alliance tensions across countries, humanitarian pressures for civilian loss. You get opportunities for miscalculation. And once those things are moving, the war no longer belongs entirely to the people who started it. That's what makes these moments so dangerous. They become self-expanding and affect the world in many cases. Not automatically and not inevitably, of course, but structurally. And that is the word I want people to think about, structurally. Because it's not emotionally and it's not tribally, but it is structurally. Now we move to the fourth system, American politics. Sticky subject, but we have to talk about it. Because a lot of foreign policy commentary still talks like, well, war is happening over there and politics happens over here, but that's not how this works. The domestic political front is very much so a part of the war. Inflation, and gas prices, and narrative management, and consumer stress, approval ratings, election pressures, especially with the midterm elections coming up. All that is very much so in play. A war doesn't need to land in your neighborhood to affect your political reality. It just has to alter your everyday life. That can be through prices and fear or attention and the stories citizens tell themselves about it all. That's why I keep saying this. It's not just a military moment, it's a transmission system. And when a war starts pushing through energy prices, market confidence, and public patience, our lawmakers don't only respond to battlefields. Well, in theory, they respond to voters. And voters, God bless them, do not say that I'm deeply concerned about the strategy and the safeguards in play. No, the voters say, why is everything more expensive? And that's fair, which, to be fair, is a great metric of how a war or conflict is going. Now, let's move to the fifth system, power, influence, narrative, religion, lobbying, information warfare, especially in this ever-increasing AI world. All these things that people usually scream about, but right now they're in this one undifferentiated blob. So let's separate them. First, lobbying and campaign finance. Now, if you want to talk about political influence seriously, you have to talk about the channels through which it's done. Direct PAC contributions are one thing, independent expenditures through super PACs are another, and lobbying disclosures are yet another. All these have different rules and different disclosures and even different functions. So when somebody says a line like, this group funds all of Congress, the first move is not to admire the passion. The first move is to ask, well, what exactly counts here? Because according to the Federal Election Commission, APAC showed 31.66 million total receipts for the 25 to 26 cycle. I believe that ended on January 31st, 2026. And that's a real number. It's auditable. And it matters because money shapes the political envelope long before a politician gives a speech pretending that they arrived at a position through pure morality or analysis. Washington is not that innocent, and we know that. Neither is the donor class, and we know that too. Neither is the foreign policy establishment, and a lot of Americans can feel it right now. Now, second on this list is religion. You can't honestly talk about the region, the Gulf region in particular, and the Middle East, as if the religious backstory of that geography doesn't matter, because it very much so does. Jerusalem matters. The Temple Mount matters. Al-Aqsa matters. The Dome of the Rock matters. End time narratives that people believe in matter, and political theology matters. These things, they move crowds, they harden coalitions, they narrow political imagination. So no, this is not some side note for theology class. Religious identity and prophetic imagination are part of the fuel that fuels this war. But they're not the only fuel. And if you pretend otherwise, you're not attaining clarity on the conflict. You're simplifying it, you're sanitizing it. Now, we need to talk about Epstein. Carefully, yes. Softly, certainly no. Because this is where people tend to become either cowardly or hysterical. And neither is wrong here, because this is a lot to take in. One thing is beyond serious dispute, and that is that Jeffrey Epstein was a convicted sex offender who ran a international trafficking network exploiting underage girls. We know that. DOJ and FBI have corroborated it. Ghislaine Maxwell, allegedly in jail or is in jail, and was heavily involved in the recruitment and abuse of minors. Those aren't rumors. Those are documented facts. Now, this is where the public gets angry, and honestly, it isn't without reason. Release logs, contact books, and other materials name many of our leaders, most powerful people, obviously our president, many, many times. That's real. The social proximity is real. The access is real. The immunity vibe around all these heads, the qualified immunity aspect of it, seems to be real. And this is where I think a lot of people get concerned, because the public can start seeing the pattern, and institutions refuse to name them clearly. A trafficking network this large didn't exist in a vacuum. An elite network this intimate did not orbit itself. Obviously not. Compromise matters, leverage matters, access matters, shame certainly matters, and secrecy, above all, matters. So you don't need to claim one neat master theory that everyone was morally compromised and led to all of this and that. It isn't a wild idea, but that is how power has worked for a very long time now, and we all see it. And once society realizes that people live above consequences, it gets tumultuous. They distrust. The public no longer trusts the institution. So my point here is that Epstein's story shattered any notion that the elite rot is not a real thing. The elite rot is real. It's documented. And a lot of people in public are finally starting to speak up about it. And that brings us to the final front. the information war. Because right now, everything is an information overload. And this may be the most modern part of this whole thing, because this sort of technology is novel. Because now, real atrocity, real corruption, real journalism, propaganda, AI generated garbage, partisan clipping, and outright fabrication all arrive on your Instagram or TikTok or YouTube feeds in the same font, same speed, next to somebody trying to sell you a sleep gummy. This is an absurd way for a civilization to process information, and it's novel. So that's the backdrop, but that's the reality, and that's where we are, which means public literacy is more important than ever before. It's not a hobby anymore. It's a civic duty, not because everybody has to become an intelligent analyst, but because if you cannot distinguish between what is proven and what is documented but incomplete and what is disputed and what is just simulation dressed up as insight, then you aren't really participating in democracy. You're being driven around inside it. And that, to me, is a larger lesson for all of us. It's why I'm making this video today. Not just about this war, but about this era and this time that we live in. So, that was a lot for a first episode. But here's the takeaway. The missiles are part of the story. Oil is part of the story. Religion is a part of the story, and political money is definitely part of the story. Elite compromise is part of the story, and narrative shaping and narrative warfare is part of the story. And when people flatten all that into one sentence, they're not really explaining the conflict here. They're just marketing it. They're scratching the surface. What we're watching is a system, a military system, a nuclear verification system, an energy system, a regional alliance system, a media system, an influence system, a domestic political system. That all is the war beneath the war. And the goal of understanding this is to not become paranoid, but rather precise. Because when you separate fact from inference and narrative from evidence and power from performance, you become much harder to manipulate. And right now, this may be one of the most patriotic things a person can do right now. Pay attention, use your voice, talk to people, push past slogans, stay curious, do your own research, stay skeptical, follow independent media. Find out for yourself. So, welcome to the Never Late Show. We're not late. We're arriving exactly on time. Cheers. Thanks.